She was exiled for being cursed. Blue-skin fever-racked days hunted by her own kind. Then 2 human girls appeared through the snow with an offer that shattered everything. You need a home, and we need a bride for our father. This is how one Kyathi, outcast, found sanctuary in the most unlikely place, and how a frontier family's survival came to depend on the very thing their settlum. Her blue skin stood out against the endless white snow like a warning flag. The fever wouldn't break. It clung to her bones like ice, a deep cold that had nothing to do with the snow underfoot. She moved through the frozen waste, each step a separate battle against the wind and her own failing body. They called her cursed. Her people drove her out with spears and harsh words, calling her a bringer of misfortune. She didn't fight them, just turned and walked into the human territories where the cold might finish what her own kind started. Her body had become a map of pain, old scars from the exile, new bruises from falls on the ice, and the constant ache of the fever that made her vision swim. She stumbled over a hidden rock, caught herself on a snow-covered branch. The impact sent fresh pain through her already sore hands. This was how it would end, then. Alone in the white silence, a blue-skinned alien in human lands, a fitting end for an exile. No ceremony, no marker, just the snow eventually covering her tracks, then her body. Then she saw movement in the trees ahead. 2 small figures emerged from the swirling snow of the blizzard. Human children wrapped in heavy furs against the cold. They didn't run at the sight of her alien form. They didn't scream. They just stood there watching, their eyes steady. Their gazes held no fear. Only a strange calculation, like they were measuring her for something. One of them spoke, a girl with dark hair peeking from her hood. Her voice cut through the howling wind, clean and sharp. You need a home, she said, her words landing with the weight of truth. And we need a bride for our father. The offer hung in the air between them. Sailor stared at the girls, then passed them to the stone house she could just make out through the trees. Smoke rose from its chimney, a promise of warmth, of shelter, of life instead of death. Her people's warnings echoed in her fevered mind. Humans were dangerous, unpredictable, but these children showed no aggression, only that unnerving calm. The snow bit at her exposed skin, and the fever made her shiver uncontrollably. She looked from the house back to the girls, then down at her own blue hands, nearly numb with cold. Die out here in the snow, a forgotten exile,
or follow these strange children into the unknown.
The calculation was simple, even through the haze of fever and exhaustion. She took one step forward, then another. The girls turned without another word and began leading her toward the stone house. Their small forms moved with purpose through the snow, not looking back to see if she followed. They knew she would. The words hung between them in the cold air. An impossible bargain from 2 children who should be frightened. Sailor's gaze shifted from their calm faces to the stone house behind them. Smoke rose from its chimney in a steady gray column. She could almost feel the heat of a fire from here, the promise of warmth after days in the snow, the chance to sleep without freezing to death. But sanctuary always came with a price. She knew that from her own people. Nothing was given freely. These girls wanted a bride for their father. They were offering shelter in exchange for a role to play, a part in some story she didn't know. Her blue skin marked her as different, as cursed. Yet they looked at her like she was expected, like she was part of a plan. The twins stood firm in the snow. Their gazes held no childlike uncertainty. Moran and Lura watched her with unnerving directness. They didn't blink against the wind. They didn't fidget or look away. Their stillness was more adult than child. They saw things others missed, they said. Patterns in the dirt, threads of what was coming. They told her they saw her arrival, knew she would be here at this exact time. This wasn't random chance or luck. It was something woven, a pattern they recognized from their readings. A prophecy that brought a blue-skinned woman to their doorstep during a blizzard. They spoke of it like stating simple facts. The sky is gray. Snow is cold. You are here because we saw you coming. Sailor's mind worked through the fever haze. The choice was brutally simple. Die out here in the snow. Her body would freeze solid by morning. The blizzard would cover her completely. Or step through that door into an unknown future. Become a bride to a man she'd never met. Live among humans who feared her kind. She looked at the stone house again. The solid door. The thick walls that would block the wind. Her body shook with cold that went deeper than her skin. The fever made her joints ache. She took one step forward. The snow crunched under her boot. Then another step. The twins turned without speaking and led the way. The door was heavy wood reinforced with metal bands. Moran pushed it open. Warm air rushed out to meet the cold. The smell of wood smoke and cooking stew. Sailor stepped across the threshold. The change in temperature hit her like a physical force. Her skin tingled with the sudden warmth. The door closed behind her with a solid thud. The sound sealed her decision. The wind stopped instantly. The silence inside felt heavy after the constant howl outside. She stood in the entryway, dripping snow melt onto stone floors. The unspoken contract began in that moment. Shelter for service, warmth for willingness, a place to stay in exchange for becoming what they needed. She could still turn back. The door was right there. But her body wouldn't move toward it. The warmth held her in place. The promise of rest. The chance to live through the night. She looked at the two girls watching her. Their expressions hadn't changed. They still measured her with those calm eyes, waiting to see what she would do next. The deal was made now. No going back and feared most. The man stood by the hearth, all quiet strength and worn edges. Kalen watched the blue-skinned woman his daughters brought through his door. Water dripped from her fur wraps onto his stone floor. Her skin was the color of deep ocean, something no human naturally possessed. He saw the way her eyes darted around the room, taking in exits, assessing threats. The fever made her movements unsteady, but her awareness remained sharp. He thought of what his settlement would say, the fear they would feel at a coyote under their roof. Their stories warned of blue-skinned curses and misfortune. She represented everything they'd been taught to drive out. The danger was real, not just superstition. Her people had different customs, different loyalties. Bringing her here could turn his neighbors against him, could get them all exiled or worse, but his daughters stood beside her without fear. Moran and Lyra looked up at him with those unnerving eyes of theirs. Their certainty held no room for doubt. They believed this woman belonged here. Their unshakable faith reminded him of their mother in her final days, when she knew things no one else could see. He remembered his wife's voice, soft but firm by another fire years ago. She'd been watching their daughters play with a child from the southern enclave whose skin was darker than theirs. The color of skin doesn't tell you the color of their heart, she'd said. The words had stuck with him through winters and hardships. He made the choice quickly, protection over blame. The safety of his children came before settlement fears. This was a gamble on a stranger, but his daughter's instincts had kept them alive through worse. He nodded once, a small movement that carried the weight of their future. He gestured toward the fire. "Sit," he said. His voice was rough from disuse, but not unkind. He took a bowl from the shelf and ladled stew from the pot hanging over the flames. Their food stores were low. Winter had been harder than expected. Sharing meant less for all of them. But he filled the bowl nearly to the brim and handed it to her. Her blue fingers trembled as she took it. The heat must have felt good against her skin. She didn't thank him with words, but her eyes held something other than fear for the first time. A flicker of surprise, maybe relief. This moment was a quiet reckoning. By offering food and shelter, he defied every warning his people had ever given him. He broke the cycle of fear that governed their interactions with outsiders. The stone floor of his home became neutral ground where old rules didn't apply. He didn't know it yet, but he'd just bet their survival on an exile. Their winter stores, their safety, their standing in the settlement, all risked on this blue-skinned woman his prophetic daughters brought home. The fire crackled, throwing shadows across her unusual features. She ate slowly, watching him over the rim of the bowl. The silence between them felt heavy but not hostile. Two different species sharing a meal in a stone house while the blizzard raged outside. Days settled into a fragile routine inside the stone house. The blizzard passed, leaving deep snow and bitter cold. Sailor's fever broke on the third morning. She woke to find a clean set of furs laid out for her and the twins watching from the doorway. This new survival didn't involve fighting the elements directly. It meant learning their ways without asking too many questions. She learned human tools first. Their knives felt wrong in her hands, too heavy, poorly balanced. But she practiced until she could skin a rabbit without nicking the hide. She studied the patterns of the house, when Kalen rose before dawn to check the perimeter, when the twins gathered snow to melt for washing, where they stored the dried meat and root vegetables. She mapped their habits like terrain. In return, she taught them coyote tracking. She showed them how to read the forest signs their eyes usually missed, the way ice crystals formed differently over animal tracks versus disturbed ground. How to distinguish old scat from fresh by its frost pattern. The twins watched with intense focus, their heads tilted in identical angles of concentration. Her knowledge, once the mark of her difference, became a tool for them all. She pointed out a disturbed branch line even Kaylin had overlooked. It led them to a winter-denning porcupine they'd have walked past, meat they desperately needed. That night they ate better than they had in weeks. Kaylin watched her work. He saw how her people knew things his didn't. It wasn't magic like the settlement feared. It was a different way of seeing the world. Where humans looked for obvious threats, Kyathi noticed subtle disruptions. A bent twig at knee height. Scratches on bark that didn't match local wildlife. She read the forest like a written language his people only vaguely understood. The twins bridged the gap between them. They spoke both languages, human and Kyathi, without needing words. They translated Sailor's observations into terms their father could use. They explained Kaylin's caution into concepts Sailor respected. They saw both sides like they saw patterns in the dirt. Their small hands would gesture between the two adults, connecting understanding without judgment. A shared language formed through action, not speech. Sailor learned to stack firewood the human way after watching Kaylin do it once. He started leaving his sharpening stone where she could reach it after noticing her blade needed work. She began tending the hearth fire without being asked. He brought her an extra blanket during the coldest nights. These small actions built a grammar of mutual care. Sailor's exile identity began to fade in that stone house. The constant tension in her shoulders eased. She stopped flinching at sudden movements. The blue skin that marked her as cursed became just skin. It was the color of the woman who found the porcupine, who could track game in fresh snow, who taught his daughters how to move quietly through frozen undergrowth. She was becoming something new, something the settlement never imagined possible. Not a curse or an outsider, not just a potential bride. She became the person who noticed when the food stores needed organizing, who showed the twins how to set snares that didn't freeze shut, who sat by the fire mending furs while Kaylin sharpened tools. Her hands, once only used for survival, now helped build a home. The change happened gradually, like ice forming on the window each night. But each day she seemed less like a Kyathi exile and more like part of the household. Her movements became more sure inside those stone walls. Her gaze lost its defensive edge when Kaylin entered a room. She even started humming sometimes while working, a low Kyathi melody that made the twins stop to listen. The test came on a night sharp with cold. The air felt like glass in the lungs. The fire had burned low. Everyone slept except Sailor, who sat watching the embers. Then a sound cut through the silence. A scrape of claw on stone outside. Then another, a third. The rhythm was wrong for any local animal. Too deliberate, too coordinated. Kaylin was on his feet before his eyes fully opened. His hand found the hunting spear leaning by his bedside. The raptors were here. The same pack that took his wife 3 winters back. He knew their sound, knew their hunting patterns. They remembered this house, remembered easy prey. The house became a fortress under siege. Kaylin barred the heavy door just as something heavy slammed against it. Wood splintered but held. Another impact came from the side window. The shutters groaned under the assault. Chaos erupted in the dark space. The twins woke without crying. They rolled from their beds and moved toward the center of the room. The fragile accord they'd built faced its first real battle. Kaylin fought with a primal fury, a father defending his home. He thrust his spear through a gap in the shutters, felt it connect with something solid. A screech tore through the night. He pulled back the spearhead dark with blood. His movements were raw power, years of bitterness and loss driving each strike. Sailor moved with a different rhythm. She took up her Kyathi spear from its place by the fire. Her form was efficient, deadly. She didn't waste motion. Each thrust found its mark. Her blue skin seemed to absorb the moonlight filtering through the shutters. She fought without sound, without the rage that drove Kaylin. This was calculation. Survival mathematics written in blood and movement. The twins became the conductors of the chaos. They stood back to back in the center of the room. Their voices cut through the noise with unnatural calm. "Left flank," Moran said. Her tone was flat, instructional. Kaylin swung his spear left as a clawed hand ripped through the weakening shutters. The strike met empty air where his head had been. "Now strike high," Ulrich called. Sailor's spear shot upward, caught a raptor in the throat as it tried to force its head through the broken window. The creature fell back with a gurgling cry. Their warnings mapped the fight before it happened. They saw the patterns, read the attack vectors like lines on a page. The battle was fought on 3 fronts, but it was one fight. Kalen held the door, his strength and rage keeping the main entry secure. Sailor covered the windows, her precision eliminating threats as they appeared. The twins orchestrated the defense, their strange foresight directing both fighters to where they needed to be. Another raptor shattered the right window completely. Glass and wood fragments sprayed across the room. The creature began forcing its bulk through the opening. Kalen was too far away. Sailor had 2 others to contend with on the opposite side. The twins didn't flinch. The fire, they said together. Kalen understood. He grabbed a burning log from the hearth with his free hand, threw it at the invading raptor. The creature recoiled from the sudden heat and flames. They fought like that through the long night, a strange harmony of human strength, Kayathi skill, and childlike prescience. The house held. The shutters were battered but intact. The door stood firm despite deep claw marks in its surface. 4 raptor bodies lay motionless in the snow outside. The others had retreated before dawn. The family stood breathing heavily in the wreckage of their main room. The air smelled of blood and smoke and fear. The lead raptor came through the broken window in a shower of wood fragments. It was bigger than the others, a monster of tooth and rage built for killing. Its scales were dark in the firelight, its eyes burned with predatory intent. It didn't hesitate, didn't assess the room. It moved straight for the twins standing back to back in the center. It went for the heart of the family, the 2 girls who had brought them all together. Kalen saw it happen in slow motion from across the room. He was too far away. His spear was wedged in another raptor's ribs near the door. He couldn't pull it free in time. He watched the creature's claws extend toward his daughters. His wife's face flashed in his memory. The same terror, the same helpless feeling. Sailor was closer. She moved without thought. Her body reacted before her mind processed the threat, but her hands were empty. Her Kayathi spear stood lodged in a raptor's chest by the opposite window. She had no weapon, no way to block the attack. Then she saw it. A knife on the heavy wooden table. Kalen's wife's old hunting knife. The bone handle was worn smooth from years of use. The blade showed careful maintenance despite its age. Sailor's hand closed around the handle. The metal felt cold and familiar in her grip. The weight balanced perfectly. This was a tool made by someone who understood cutting and killing. She didn't try to block the raptor's attack. That would have been suicide against something that size. Instead, she sidestepped, a fluid Kayathi evasion move that took her just outside the creature's reach. Moran mirrored the movement perfectly without being told. The twin shifted her weight at the exact same moment, putting herself slightly behind Sailor's protective stance. Their movements synchronized like they'd trained together for years. The raptor's momentum carried it forward. Its claws scratched across stone where the girls had been standing. Sailor used its forward motion against it. She drove the blade upward with both hands. The point found a gap in the scaled hide just below the jaw. She pushed until the entire length of steel disappeared into flesh. The raptor made a choke sound, different from the predatory screeches of before. This was the noise of something dying. It staggered back 1 step. Then 2, its legs gave out. The heavy body crashed to the stone floor. The impact shook the room. Silence returned. The only sounds were their ragged breathing and the fire crackling in the hearth. The knife in Sailor's hand was wet with alien blood. It dripped onto the stone between her boots. She looked down at the blade, at the familiar bone handle now stained red, then at Kalen across the room. His face showed something beyond relief, beyond gratitude. The twins remained perfectly still. They looked from their father to Sailor to the dead raptor. Their expressions held no surprise, only confirmation. They had seen this moment too, known it would happen exactly this way. The knife, the move, the killing strike. Kalen finally pulled his spear free from the other raptor. He crossed the room slowly. His eyes never left the knife in Sailor's hand. He stopped beside the body of the lead raptor, looked at the clean kill wound, then at Sailor again. He reached out slowly, not for the knife, for her hand that held it. His fingers brushed against hers, both of them sticky with blood. "You used her knife," he said. His voice was rough. Sailor didn't pull her hand away. It was the only weapon left. He nodded slowly. His eyes said he knew it was more than that. The knife had chosen its wielder in that moment. His wife's blade had saved their children, had been wielded by the woman his daughters brought home. The patterns were connecting in ways even he could see now. The knife felt different in her hand now. It wasn't just a tool anymore. It was part of the story, part of whatever was being woven in this stone house. She looked at the blood on the blade. Human steel, alien blood, a union of necessity that might just become something more. The silence that replaced the fighting felt heavier than the noise had been. It pressed down on the room, thick with the smell of blood and broken wood. The family stood together in the wreckage of their main room, all of them breathing hard, all of them alive. Kalen looked at his daughters, then at Sailor still holding the bloody knife. They had survived. They had won. Then torches appeared outside the broken windows, dozens of them flickering in the pre-dawn dark. The settlement had heard the fighting. The sounds of raptors in battle carried far in the cold air. They came armed with hunting spears and worried faces. Neighbors who had ignored Kalen's isolation until now. The threat was too big to ignore. They saw the blue-skinned woman first. Sailor stood near the dead lead raptor, the knife still in her hand. Her skin seemed to glow in the torchlight. Alien. Different. Wrong to their eyes. Then they saw the dead raptors outside the windows. 4 large bodies lying in the snow. But they didn't see the salvation. They didn't see the protected children or the defended home. They saw the curse their stories warned about. The danger they always feared from outsiders. A Kayathi holding a human knife amid death and destruction. Their minds connected the wrong dots. Elder Marcus pushed through the crowd. His face was pale in the torchlight. He pointed a shaking finger at Sailor. "I told you," he said to Kalen. His voice trembled with anger and fear. "I warned you about bringing that thing here. Now look what's happened." He turned to the others. "The blue skin brings death. Always has. We should have driven her out when she first appeared." He demanded her immediate banishment. His words were sharp and final. "Take her to the snow. Let the cold finish what the raptors started, before she brings more misfortune to us all." The crowd murmured agreement. Fear was easier than thinking, faster than understanding. The very act that saved them became evidence against her. Marcus pointed at the knife in her hand. "She arms herself with our steel. She kills with our weapons. What happens when she turns that blade on us?" He didn't see the dead raptor at her feet, only the armed alien in their midst. He pointed at the broken windows. "She brings destruction to our homes, violence to our doorsteps, not mentioning the raptors that would have killed them all, the pack that had taken 3 settlers last winter. The protection she had provided became proof of her danger. Fear was a quicker language than gratitude. It required no thought, no complex understanding, just reaction." The settlers nodded. Their faces hardened. They remembered old stories about blue-skinned raiders from the northern wastes, about curses and bad luck following Kayathi contact. They didn't know Sailor. They knew their fears. The safety she had fought for vanished in that moment. The warmth of the stone house meant nothing. The shared meals, the taught lessons, the protected children, all wiped away by fear and pointed fingers. She was back to being an outsider, a curse, a thing to be driven out. Kalen stepped between her and the crowd. His body blocked their view of her. But the damage was done. The accusation hung in the air like wood smoke. Sailor's hand tightened on the knife handle. The blood on the blade was drying now, sticky and dark. She looked from the angry faces outside to Kalen's broad back. Then to the twins standing calm amid the chaos. The settlement had spoken. Their verdict was clear: banishment or death. The same choice her own people had given her. The same cold exile waiting in the snow. Everything she had built here was crumbling. The trust, the safety, the fragile sense of belonging, all torn away by fear and tradition. She looked down at the knife in her hand, Kalen's wife's knife, the tool that had saved them, the evidence that condemned her. The irony tasted bitter. She had fought for this family, killed for them. Now that same protection was being used to destroy her. The world had narrowed to torchlight and angry voices and the certain knowledge that some patterns never change. The crowd murmured their agreement. The decision seemed made. Torchlight flickered across grim faces set in familiar patterns of fear. Elder Marcus nodded, satisfied. The matter was settled. Banishment, exile, the old ways upheld. Then a small voice cut through the murmuring. Clear and steady, Moran stepped forward from the shadows near the hearth. Her sister followed a half-step behind. They moved between Sailor and the crowd without hesitation. 2 small figures facing dozens of armed adults. They stood shoulder to shoulder, blocking the view of the blue-skinned woman behind them. Their faces showed no fear of the angry settlers, no uncertainty about their position. Moran looked directly at Elder Marcus. Her voice didn't waver when she spoke. "We choose her," she said. 3 words that changed everything in the room. The simplicity of the statement left no room for argument. It wasn't a request. It was a fact stated like the weather or the time of day. They had seen this moment too. This exact confrontation, this precise choice. Their strange foresight had shown them the torchlight and the angry voices, had shown them standing here saying these words. They knew how this ended before it began. Their claim shifted everything. This wasn't about settlement politics anymore. Wasn't about old fears or traditions. It became about family, about 2 children choosing the woman who saved their lives, who fought beside their father, who taught them things no one else could. It was child logic, simple and unbreakable. She protected us. We choose her. No complexity, no weighing of risks or consequences, just the clean mathematics of loyalty and care. The twins didn't see a curse or an outsider. They saw the person who stepped between them and death, who used their mother's knife to save them. Kalen moved to stand with them. His choice was already made. Had been made when he offered her shelter that first night. When he shared their food. When he watched her save his daughters. He stood behind the twins, his hands resting on their small shoulders. His presence reinforced their words without needing speech. Then he spoke. His voice was low but carried through the sudden silence. "I would burn this entire settlement to ash before I let anyone hurt them." The words hung in the cold air. No threat in his tone. Just simple statement of fact. He meant every syllable. The settlers shifted uneasily. They knew Kalen, knew he didn't make idle threats, knew he'd defended this house alone against worse than raptors. His loyalty to his daughters was absolute. If they chose the blue-skinned woman, he would defend that choice with everything he had. The political standoff cracked under the weight of that simple family unity. Elder Marcus opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He looked from the determined twins to their resolute father, to the silent Kayathi woman behind them. The dynamics had changed completely. Consent became the new rule in that moment. The settlers couldn't force banishment without fighting the whole family, without destroying what little community they had left. The twins' choice and Kalen's protection created a barrier more solid than any wall. The torchlight seemed less certain now. The angry murmuring died away. People lowered their weapons slightly. They were still afraid, still uncertain. But the simple reality of a family standing together against the world gave them pause. Even fear had its limits when faced with that kind of unity. Sailor watched from behind the protective line of Kalen and the twins. Her hand still held the bloody knife, but her grip had loosened. The immediate danger had passed. The accusation still hung in the air, but now it was balanced against something stronger, against the will of a family that refused to be separated. The settlement would have to find another way. Compromise or confrontation, but not tonight. Not against Kalen's unwavering defense of his children's choice. The rules had been rewritten by 2 small girls and their father's willingness to stand with them. Marcus was backed into a corner. Not by weapons or numbers, by simple logic and a father's raw threat. He looked from Kalen's set face to the twins' unwavering eyes. He couldn't fight the entire family. Not here, not now. The settlers watched him, waiting for leadership. He had to offer something that wouldn't spark immediate violence, a compromise that saved face but acknowledged their new reality. He cleared his throat. The sound was uneasy in the tense silence. "A trial then," he said. His voice carried less certainty than before. "She stays until spring. We'll see if her presence brings more harm than good." The words were a retreat dressed as concession. He couldn't force banishment, so he proposed probation. Her worth would be measured in survival terms, in practical utility. Could she hunt? Could she protect? Would she pull her weight through the hardest months? The settlement would watch and judge. Cold metrics of food gathered and threats neutralized. Nothing emotional. Nothing about family bonds or strange children's visions. Just survival arithmetic. Sailor stepped forward then. She moved past Kalen's protective stance, stood where everyone could see her clearly. The bloody knife was still in her hand, but she held it loosely at her side. Her voice was raw from the fight, but clear in the cold air. She told them why her people exiled her. Not for any crime or betrayal. For questioning their fear of humans. For suggesting that not all outsiders were threats. that sometimes the real danger came from within, from blindly following traditions that made no sense. Her crime was asking why. Why fear what you don't understand? Why drive out someone for being different? She looked at the settlers' faces in the torchlight. Fear, not fate, is the true danger we face, she said. Her words cut through the night. It makes you see threats where there are none. Makes you attack allies because they look different. She gestured toward the dead raptors with the knife. Those were the real threat. Not me, not my skin color. Those creatures that would have killed your children. Then she made her offer. Not a plea. A statement of capability. She would teach them Kayathi tracking methods. Show them how to read the forest better than they ever had. Her strength would help defend the settlement. Her knowledge would put more food in their stores. She would earn her place through action, not words. Through protection, not promises. The pact was sealed in that moment. Exile was reframed as potential strength. Her outsider status became an asset instead of a liability. She brought skills they lacked, perspectives they needed. The very difference that made her dangerous also made her valuable. The settlers murmured among themselves. The anger had faded, replaced by practical consideration. Winter was coming. They needed every advantage. She had won a stay of execution, not a pardon. The trial period meant constant scrutiny. Every mistake would be noted. Every success would be measured against their fears. She would have to prove herself daily to people who wanted her to fail, who watched for signs of the curse they believed in. But she had time now. Until spring. Time to show them what she could do. Time to change their minds through action instead of words. The torches began to disperse. The settlers drifted back toward their own homes. The immediate threat was over. The long test was just beginning. Sailor watched them go. The knife felt heavy in her hand. She looked at the blood drying on the blade, then at Kaylin and the twins standing beside her. They had given her a chance. Now she had to prove their faith wasn't misplaced. The real work started at sunrise. Winter closed in with a finality that silenced the world outside. Deep snow piled against the stone house, sealing them in a white landscape where sound traveled differently. This became a time of lean hunting and quiet healing. The raptor attack had left its marks on both the house and its inhabitants. Callan spent days reinforcing the damaged windows with heavier shutters. Sailor's bruises faded from deep purple to pale yellow against her blue skin. The twins watched the repairs with quiet satisfaction, occasionally pointing out weak spots even Kaylin had missed. The house transformed into a workshop for a new way of life. Tools from both cultures lay side by side on the workbench. Kayathi skinning knives next to human wood-carving tools. Dried herbs Sailor recognized from her homeland hung beside local plants Kaylin insisted had healing properties. They mended clothing together by the fire. Sailor's precise stitching repairing Kaylin's worn jackets, his heavier patches strengthening her lighter Kayathi garments. The room smelled of wood smoke, pine resin, and the sharp scent of the medicinal teas they brewed for each other. Sailor and Kaylin knit a domestic rhythm from their two cultures. She learned to bake the dense human bread that lasted for days. He adopted her method of preserving meat with certain mountain herbs that prevented spoilage. Their movements around each other in the confined space became a silent dance. She would reach for the water bucket just as he moved to fill it. He would stoke the fire moments before she mentioned the dropping temperature. The twins watched these developments with knowing smiles, saying nothing but exchanging significant looks. He taught her the land's intimate secrets, where the ice thinned over hidden streams, which south-facing slopes held the last winter berries, how to distinguish wolf tracks from coyote and fresh powder. These were human ways of reading the territory, different from Kayathi methods but equally valid. She listened carefully, storing each lesson alongside her own knowledge. The map of the area in her mind grew more detailed, more complete. She led the settlement's trackers by listening first. She didn't correct their methods outright. Instead, she asked questions that made them notice what they'd missed. Why was this deer trail more traveled than that one? What did the pattern of icicles on these branches indicate about wind direction? The trackers began seeing the forest through new eyes. Her teaching method was subtle, almost invisible. They hardly realized they were learning Kayathi ways until they found themselves spotting things that had always been there. The successful elk hunt became their shared victory. 3 bulls taken in one coordinated effort. Sailor's tracking found the herd's winter bedding area. Kaylin's knowledge of the terrain guided their approach. The settlement's hunters followed their lead without question now. They returned with more meat than they'd seen in 2 winters combined. The celebration that night felt different from previous gatherings. Less tension. More genuine warmth. People looked at Sailor with calculating respect instead of fear. Afterward, by the fire, Kaylin reached over and brushed a spot of dried blood from her cheek. His touch was careful, almost hesitant. She turned her face into his palm. The kiss was quiet, not rushed or desperate, a natural progression from all they'd built together. A spark that had been growing through shared work and shared danger became a steady flame. The twins will be insufferable, Kaylin said against her hair. His voice held a warmth she hadn't heard before. They already are, Sailor replied. She could feel his laugh rumbling through his chest where her hand rested. Their bond deepened into something more complex than attraction. Respect wove through the physical closeness. Trust built on proven actions rather than empty promises. They knew each other's capabilities now. Had seen each other fight, teach, lead, and protect. The connection felt solid in ways that went beyond emotion. It was a partnership tested by survival and strengthened by choice. The stone house felt different that night. Not just shelter anymore, something closer to what the word home actually meant.